Hey guys, I'm Evan with Cypress Design Works, and today we're going to be talking about the Laguna A Flux 12. This is an air cleaner that basically is a giant fan that pulls air through a series of filters, taking dust and fine particles out of the air so you're not breathing it in. This is an important addition to any shop that does pretty much anything with wood because, as you may not know, wood dust is actually a carcinogen. It's really important that you do not get sensitized to it. So it's important to have something like this in your shop if you're doing anything like hand sanding, routing. Pretty much any kind of cutting operation is going to put fine dust in the air, and something like this air cleaner is a great way to get that pulled out of the air through the series of filters that are in these air cleaners. This Laguna Air Cleaner specifically has two stages of filters. It's got a 5 micron outer filter, which is an electrostatic filter. This is going to get the bulk of the fine dust out of the air, and it has a 1 micron inner filter. That inner filter is going to get those super fine particles that are really dangerous to you pulled out of it, and the air that comes out the other end of the cleaner is fully cleaned all the way down to 1 micron. Both the outer and the inner filter with the Laguna Air Cleaner are washable, so you don't have to replace them all the time. Every couple of months or years you can replace them when they get real bad, but you can take them out, you can wash them, let them dry, and reinstall them. So that's a big selling point for me because I don't like to buy filters all the time. And spending, 15 minutes washing these is worth the money. So I'm excited about it. I'm going to break this thing open. We're going to install it right above our workbench here because this is where most of our fine dust gets created. Between routing and hand sanding, a lot of fine dust gets created here. It's also in line with my table saw and my miter saw, which are two of my other high fine dust creating tools. So having it in this area is going to be really beneficial. The Laguna Air Cleaner is a 1/5 horsepower unit, which does about 1200 CFM. So in a normal size shop, about 20 by 20 with 8-foot ceilings, you're going to be able to clean that shop 22 times an hour. So it'll go through that full volume of air 22 times in 1 hour. So for most shops, one of these is more than sufficient to clean that shop and keep that air nice and clean. The plan is to take this thing out of the box, go over some of the features, install it in my shop, and then I'll probably take a few weeks before I actually publish this video so that I can come back and give you guys some feedback on the performance of the unit. Things like noise, how well the timer function works, and how well it seems to clean the air. It's going to be kind of a perception thing, personal perception, but I've had these before. I own several of these air cleaners, not this one specifically, but other ones, so I'll be able to give you kind of my 2 cents on the value and the quality, and after a few weeks I should be able to give you a pretty good idea of just how well the system works. Just as a disclosure up front, Laguna did provide this to us for free, but this is not paid advertising. They're not paying me to give a certain opinion. They purely gave me the system to install in my shop and to talk about what I think about it. So I'm free to say whatever I want one way or the other, but I want to make sure you guys are aware that they did send this to us for free so that you guys have all the information when you're making your buying decisions. So let's go ahead and crack this bad boy open and get her installed. This box weighs about 50 pounds, so it's easy enough to move if you're a larger, stronger person, but just for safety's sake, it's probably a good idea to 2-man lift this to your final resting place. Alright, so once we get through the corrugated box, we have a nice styrofoam mold here and the user's manual. Put that off to the side for now. Seems to be very well packaged, which is always a good thing on something like this that's going to most likely be drop shipped unless you're picking it up at a local retailer. So having good packaging just means when it gets to you it's not going to be all dented and damaged. As something this heavy, if they didn't package it well, it would get damaged. So here I'm pulling out mounting hardware. So it comes with some eye bolts, some felt pads for if you were to fasten it to something like a work surface to help with vibration. We've got the remote control, which has power on-off, speed, and timer. So one of the cool things about this air cleaner, it's got timer, so you can set it to go off after 30 minutes all the way up to 4 hours. It's also got 3 different speeds, so if you're wanting it to be a little bit quieter, you're not really creating a lot of dust, but you want to have it running, you can have it on the lower speeds. Or if you're doing a bunch of hand sanding or routing and you want it to be on the most powerful setting, you can do that as well, all from the remote, so you don't have to be able to reach the system to turn it on. That remote will let you do it from anywhere, or within range, obviously. Alright. So first impressions of finish and quality, I love it. Beautiful, beautiful Laguna gray here. The squirrel cage fan has a grate over it, so you can't stick your hand in there or have something get stuck in there. Obviously, once the air is blowing, it's going to be shooting out, so there's nothing that's going to drift in there because the flow of air when it's running is going to be pushing it out. And on this side, you've got your first filter that you can see. That's your 5 micron electrostatic filter. That's going to catch, like I said, the big particles. And then your inner filter is a deeper filter, and that's to give it more surface area. And that is basically going to catch all of the really, really small stuff that gets through your outer filter. We'll open this up here in just a second and take a look inside briefly. Flipping it back around. On this side, you can see your power settings. So here you can see you've got half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hour, and 4 hour settings. And you've got low, medium, and high. So these are the buttons you can push to activate these manually. In our shop, having it mounted to the ceiling, we're going to be using the remote exclusively, but you could mount this on a workbench, underneath a workbench. You want to put it in the area that you're creating the fine dust, but there's lots of options on how you mount this thing, and that's completely up to the individual user. So, do what makes sense in your shop. Let's flip it back around and take a look at how these filters come out, because that's something you're going to be curious about. If you've ever had an air filter, you know you have to clean the filters pretty regularly if you want them to do a good job. One of the things you can see on this view, which is really cool about this air cleaner, it has a gauge. I'm not entirely sure yet how that works. I'll have to look at the instruction manual here in a second, but basically that lets you know when you need to change or clean your filters. So that's a nice handy reminder, because if you're like me, this isn't something that's a top priority, of focus when you're in your workshop, you're building stuff, you're painting stuff. Something that will kind of be a visual reminder is always a good thing when it comes to safety. So that's pretty cool. All right. So it looks like this just lifts and comes out. So that's super cool. There's no clasps or anything with this. It just lifts and pulls. So that's very cool. This is a 12 by 24 by 1 inch filter. So I definitely recommend sticking with the Laguna filters in general. Being washable, you'll get a lot of money's worth out of these, and it's also specifically made for this unit. But being a 12 by 24 by 1 inch, you may be able to get away with off-the-shelf filters. Just make sure you get the right size. Being non-washable, your standard furnace filters not going to be washable, and you need to make sure you get the right micron size. So you're probably better off sticking with the Laguna one, but that may be an option for you. It is a standard size to my knowledge. So this is your inner filter here. Hopefully you guys can see this. This is the 1 micron filter. It's got these deep pockets. And the reason for that is the smaller your filter goes, so going from a 5 to a 1, basically your pore size on the filter, the amount of restriction on the air goes up. So having a 1 micron filter, if it was the same surface area as this filter, you wouldn't be able to filter as much air. So by having these deep pockets of filter, it gives the filter more surface area, so you can still get the same volume of air through the 1 micron filter as you did through the 5. So that's a really good sign. I definitely like to see that. And again, this just comes right out nice and easily. You can see those deep pockets there. This is going to be super, super handy. And again, this is washable, so you can take this out, you can wash it. I would probably put on my respirator, blow it off with my air compressor, and then I would proceed to rinse it out with the sink or the bathtub and let it dry really well before reinstalling in the system. All right, it looks like it's a good thing I opened this, because there's some packaging in here to pull out. This is just some styrofoam bracing for that squirrel fan to keep it from shifting during shipping. Definitely pull those out though. You don't want them in there when it's running, or at least that's my my recommendation. But yeah, so it's got a nice big 1/5 horsepower motor in there and a big giant squirrel fan. And again, right over here where the power supply is, there's a PCB on the back side of that. Not that you care, but just so you know kind of what we're looking at here. But yeah, I mean, looks good to me. So we'll go ahead and put this thing back together. I'm going to mount this on my ceiling, like I said, so we'll go over how to do that in just a minute. So to install the filter, you need to tuck those nets of filter in first, and then you're going to lift it up to the top and bring the bottom in after that. It is important to make sure you get the direction of flow right on this filter. You don't want the pockets coming out into the room, obviously. But it looks like this one does not have a particular direction. It's graded on both sides, and there's no arrow. So this one is multi-directional. So that makes it easy. Slide it in, and boom, we're back in business. Look at that. On the power cord, there's a note saying, remove foam shipping block in base prior to use. So those are the foam blocks we took out from around the squirrel cage in there. So it is telling you should do that. That was what I figured, but that is definitely something you'll want to do. Alright, so in reading the instructions for how to mount this thing, I did notice that it said the inner filter is not washable. So you want to wash the outer filter, you want to blow it off with compressed air, and then you can wash it, rinse it off, and let it dry. The inner filter you only want to use compressed air for. You don't want to use water on that inner filter. And I also read on how this gauge works. This is some kind of force gauge that allows it to know when the air pressure is not what it should be. So basically, when this inner gauge says clean air, you're good. The inner filter has still got enough airflow through it. The outer filter does need to be cleaned. But once a month, you still want to pull off that outer filter and wash it and air compressor off that inner filter. But when this says change filter, what that's referencing is that inner filter. So that inner filter, you can air compressor off a few times, but after a couple of months of use, you're going to need to replace that inner filter. So that is a maintenance item on this thing. And this gauge tells you that it's not based on a timer, it's based on airflow, which is even better because if you don't use it a ton, it'll last you a lot longer, and it's not going to tell you to change it unless that airflow is reduced from clogging. So that's pretty cool. There's two ways to mount this I've kind of talked about earlier. There's surface mounting it, where you're going to leave it on a workbench or underneath the workbench. It comes with these adhesive-backed foam pads or felt pads. You're just going to stick these in each of the four corners on the bottom of the unit and put it where you want it. That's going to help reduce vibrations to the system and to whatever it's sitting on. What we're going to do is ceiling mount it, so I'm going to put these bolts in place of these four Phillips head screws that are on the top of the unit as opposed to the bottom for surface mounting. If you're like me, you keep all of these little foam pads because they make great furniture pads to put underneath feet, so that if you have like a hardwood floor and you don't have leg levelers on a piece of furniture, these foam pads will prevent you from scratching up the hardwood floor finish, but also keep that from, help it kind of level itself, which is nice. Alright, so I've gone ahead and grabbed a large Phillips head screwdriver and a set of wrenches. I'm going to pull these four Phillips head screws out, and we're going to replace them with these eye bolts. Now before we throw the eye bolt in, we want to put one of these nuts that comes with it on there, and that's to allow us to kind of lock this in. So I'm going to thread that all the way down, then thread this on. Now once I've got that down there, I'm going to grab a 13mm wrench, and I'm going to snug that nut down. So I use the screwdriver to kind of brace the eye bolt so I can keep it lined up with the other one, and I use the 13mm wrench to tighten that nut down against the body of the air cleaner. Alright, so I have this installed now. I didn't really appreciate the fact that it's going to be hard to film once it's installed, but I'm standing on my workbench right now. They recommend using S-hooks, but I had some nice steel carabiners, and I used that with steel chain instead of using S-hooks. But I definitely recommend you follow the instructions, which is for a minimum of 5/16 of an inch S-hooks mounted with chain ready to hold the unit. So follow the instructions and do as you will. But yeah, installation was really easy. I did have Nicole, my wife, come out and help me lift this up, and I clipped it into the carabiners. It'd be even easier if you use S-hooks. But once it's up here, I already thankfully had power box put up here knowing that I was going to do this. It does come with a pretty good sized cable, but if you don't have power on your ceiling, you're definitely going to need to run an extension cord of some kind, or like I did, put a box on your ceiling. I have these all over my ceiling because a lot of tools just makes sense to have the power cord running up instead of across the floor where it's a trip hazard. So that's my preference, but do what makes sense in your shop. Let's go ahead and turn this thing on and see how it runs, because that's really the main thing that we care about, is not how to get it up here, but how does it work once it's up here. So again, with this unit, we can use the manual buttons here. Demonstration. Nice slow ramp up speed. This is going to start on the slow setting. I'm going to turn it off so I can talk. It's going to start on the slow setting if you hit the speed button, or it's going to start on the half-an-hour setting, and in both cases it'll work its way up. So if you hit the speed setting 3 times, it'll go small or slow, medium, fast, or low, medium, high power. And if you hit the timer button, it's going to go half hour, 1 hour, 2 hour, 4 hour, and it'll cycle around again if you re-click those buttons. You can also use the remote to turn this thing on. So again, I'm going to make sure I aim it at the PCB here on the back. I'm going to hit the on button. And again, that's full speed right there. So it's loud, but it's not like running a shop vac loud. You can still have no hearing protection on if you're working right next to it. Just make sure you can hear me. It's pretty loud, but it's not as loud as like a shop vac, for instance. So it's quiet enough where I don't think you need hearing protection if you're not like right next to it. So working down here, hand sanding or routing, probably don't need hearing protection. Even on the high setting, on the low setting, you definitely don't need it. But yeah, it's definitely quieter than I was expecting for a unit that's this large. So again, this is a 5th horsepower, 1200 CFM unit, and it's on high power. It's not that loud. One of the things I do appreciate, though, it has a, I don't know what it's called, but it's a little flapper. It's basically a visual indicator that it's on, so that if you have hearing protection on and you look up at it, you can tell, because it flutters, you can tell that it is on. So it does the same thing as you've probably seen air filters with little pieces of cloth hanging off the mesh, and that cloth flutters in the wind. You don't have to do that because it has a visual indicator in there. So if you look up, you can see, hey, it's on, because that little metal dampener is fluttering in the wind. So you know visually it's on even if you can't hear it because of hearing protection. Which is a nice little feature to add because it's much more appealing to look at than an orange flag coming out the end. Alright, so at this point, my review of the unboxing is pretty much done. I mean, it looks like it's going to do exactly what I need it to. I'm going to give it a couple weeks and maybe a couple projects. I've got a desk build and then a dining table build I'm going to try to knock out in the next 2 weeks. And I'm going to use this bad boy, and I'm going to jump back on here after that to give you some more kind of real use case feedback, and then we'll publish the video after that. So hang tight, and we'll get into that right now. Hey guys, so I've had the air cleaner in my shop. It's right above me here now. And I've built 5 pieces of furniture in this shop and at this table with that air cleaner. So I've got a little bit of information. I've gotten a little bit of experience with it. Certainly not, a couple years worth. This has really only been about 2 months that I've had this in the shop. But so far, I am thoroughly enjoying it. I have nothing negative to point out about this air cleaner. It does what it's supposed to do. It's a simple machine. It's got a bunch of features that make it really easy to use, like the timer, so I can turn it on when I'm doing anything that's creating dust. I also have been getting in the practice of turning it on when I leave the shop to go inside for lunch, or to go inside and take a break, or to go check the mail, or whatever. I just run it, and it runs and turns itself off, which is really handy because, again, it's just kind of keeping the total amount of dust in the shop to a minimum. I've cleaned the filter once so far, and it took me about 60 seconds. Put my respirator on, took the filter off, and I blew it off with the air compressor. I didn't actually wash it, I just blew it out, and that worked. So, I'm really happy with it. I will note, one of the things I mentioned before was that it has a kind of a damper on the back that flutters when it's on, and that acts as a visual indicator that it's on. What I didn't realize was that's not just a visual indicator. I don't think that's actually what it's for, although that's what I use it for. That damper is actually what controls the gauge that tells you if the filter is clean or not. So that they're using that damper, which as a kind of brilliant and simple way to detect how much airflow is going through. So basically they've scaled that damper panel, the plate, to determine how much airflow is going. So if it's sitting straight out, tons of airflow. As it starts to get less airflow, it'll turn itself down. As it's fluttering, it'll flutter less, and that will tell you it's time to change the filter on the side of the machine. So kind of a simple and brilliant way to detect that I hadn't even noticed when I first installed this system. So super cool. Honestly, really happy with it. It seems to be really well priced compared to other units in its size. So there are units that are much smaller that'll do a smaller space, but in this price point, the features that are on this and the build quality seem to be really, really top notch. So definitely seems like a good buy that I can definitely recommend. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and a comment down below on what you thought about this air cleaner. And if you're not already subscribed, make sure to do that. Hit the notification bell if you're on YouTube so that you can get notified when we make content like this in the future. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great rest of your day.